that. Here we go. Okay. So in 10.5 and below, you had to import all of your Winshuttle controls inside of your InfoPath. And it was extremely excruciating. It was hard. Every time you went to had a new laptop, or if you were installing it on a server, you had to go through this import process. So with 10.6 and above, the Winshuttle designer now actually installs these controls automatically to your InfoPath. So you don't have to go through the process of importing every single one of these controls. I will send a couple links after class. One of the link is going to be to download the new designer, and another a separate file I'm going to send you is a lab. So this lab we prepared, it's on a material master, creating a material master. You can do this in really any SharePoint environment. It doesn't require anything except SharePoint. So this lab we've run several times, and people kind of see the value out of it because they can actually go through it's 10 different exercises in one lab. So what I'm thinking with this lab is it'll give you opportunities to practice what we're talking about here in class, and then our next session, session 3, you can send me any questions you may have about the lab, or we can discuss the lab in that session. So what's our first control that we're going to look at today? It's called the WS assignment control. It enables you to capture and record details about a workflow participant and their assignment. So what that means is if we have a manager and our task name for the approval name or the approval node is called manager approval, we can capture all of the information below, such as their name, their email address, what the disposition was. So did they approve it or did they reject it? Some people want to store that right in your form. Now, some of these controls that we'll talk about today, there's another control that you could use depending on your requirements and what you're overall trying to do. For example, the disposition here, whether someone approves it or not. We'll talk about the WS history control, which actually shows where someone approved or rejected it. So sometimes you may use this control for other things that another control could do it for. So it's based on your requirements. The same with the comments field. If you wanted to separate your manager comments from the other comments, you could certainly do that when you point to an individual task. So this is an individual node inside of your workflow. It's not the entire manager swim lane. You're just saying point to this specific task in my workflow, and you want to use this assignment control to gather as much information about the participant or about who's assigned that task as you can. So I'll tell you as I go whether I use the control as do I use it a lot or a little. I would say with the WS assignment control, I actually use it a little because there are other controls that actually do some of the same functionality. This is what the assignment control kind of looks like. It gathers your information here from these different manager approvals, the task dates, the time, the comments, just like we saw on the other screen. All of the information is from the assignment control. The WS attachment control enables users to attach files to your form. You can see at the bottom the different types of attachments: PDFs, TIFFs, DocX, Word documents, Excel files, JPEGs. I had even one user ask me, can I attach zip files? And the answer is yes, even though it's not listed. You can attach zip files. So these are the file formats that you can attach. This is great for supporting documents. It's also great for documents that are required for your workflow to proceed. So one document that may be required for a PO is a quote. If you don't have a quote, then we can't proceed because we can't just take your word that you want $10,000. We want a quote from a vendor. So the WS attachment control is used a lot, especially when you're attaching supporting documentation. You can have as many attachment controls as you want on the screen. All of those attachments get stored in the individual list that you're using your forms deployed to, and it's stored in the attachment of that individual list item. This is what the attachment control looks like. It allows you to change what type of functionality is required, or how many attachments are required, or what the maximum is as you're proceeding. So if I have an initial requirement that says allow the originator to upload, delete, replace any attachment, add as many as they want, they're required to at least have one, I could put this WS attachment control with the error message that we see here, you must attach at least one but no more than 5. You can put that on your originator or your ShareViz pre-process view. When you have that on the view, then you can go to the next view, and say the next view is a manager approval. So the first view, we decided that we're creating an expense report. The first view, we're saying put a WS attachment control here and say attach any receipts over $25. Once you get to the manager view, we don't want to allow the manager to delete it. So we can put that same attachment control on there, but we can uncheck the allow deletion, allow replacement, and allow upload. We don't want to allow a manager to upload receipts. Well, and that's one business requirement. Some business requirement says, I don't want to send this back to the employee, just allow the manager to attach receipts. You can do that as well, but we definitely don't want a manager deleting receipts for an expense report. So you can have this control, and based on your requirements in your application, on one view it could allow deletion and replacement, on another view it could not. And we've certainly seen that in some of the forms and workflows that we're approving, especially when it comes to capital appropriation requests, PO requests, and expense report. The WS button control, this is a custom button. It's for to replace the buttons that are at the bottom. It gives you a little bit more functionality and puts the button in line where it makes sense. Sometimes it makes sense to have a button maybe at the top of the screen or in the middle of your form. If you're rejecting it at that point, you don't want the user to scroll clear to the bottom. We also use these buttons to route workflows. So some of the out-of-the-box buttons, such as approve, reject, cancel, complete, delete, save, and route, all can serve our form and our workflow just fine. But every once in a while, we decide that we need to change our workflow around and allow the originator to cancel a running workflow. We want them, if they get assigned, if my manager rejects my purchase order request and I don't want to make any changes, I just want the PO request to go away, I can use a custom button and set fields inside of my form. So I'll show you an example of that today because I think it's really valuable to see how you can use these custom buttons. On session 4, we actually talk about how to remove the buttons at the bottom of the screen. So we'll put our own custom buttons on the form, and then we'll remove the default out-of-the-box one by using the Winshuttle configuration. These are an example of what the buttons look like. Again, you can't use the InfoPath button. We saw yesterday when we talked about it, we said InfoPath controls what was supported and what was not supported. A InfoPath button is not supported from Winshuttle. However, a Winshuttle button, a WS button, is supported, and you can change the text. Sometimes it makes sense to have a button named Approve. Other times it would make sense to say Send to Manager. When you're using a custom button, you can actually change the text of what the button does. We see examples here of all the buttons and the types you can reject, save. The set field value is setting a field within your form, so you can click on the field, this button that says set field. We use this set field button to cancel a workflow, so we'll say when you click this button it says cancel request. We name the button cancel request. When you click cancel request, it sets the status to cancel, and then it asks the user a question. It says, are you sure you want to cancel this? Yes, no. When they click yes, it goes through a rejection, and when they click no, then it cancels what it just did. It sets the status back to in process. So that's the example we'll show you with using custom buttons to allow users to cancel requests. We actually showed that on our tips and tricks session. Our comment control is to be able to put comments in line with your form versus using the Winshuttle process control. So the Winshuttle process control, we'll see that control here in a second. That control allows you to put comments at the bottom of your form, but you may decide you want comments somewhere else in your form. You want to put a text box and make it your own formatting. When you're using the out-of-the-box Winshuttle process control, you don't have control over the width and the height of the comments area. It just shows up in your form. With this comment control, you can put your own text box, your width, your height, and put it anywhere on your form. And then you set the values in the text box and the comment control to actually, you want to say scroll, allow them to type as much as they want. So you can see that I have the multi-line selection here. And you say show the scroll area when necessary. The comment controls, with the comment control, there's a button that says auto refresh when start and auto refresh when end. So when you put a comment control and you point it to this text box called comments, then it will, the user can type in their comments. As soon as they get done typing and hit save and route or approve, it'll clear those comments so the next user doesn't see those comments in the actual text box. However, they will see the comments in the Winshuttle history. So I'll show you an example of the comment control when we're creating our forms today. The comment control I do use a lot, and this control I use a lot. This is the Winshuttle current user control. This control is very important because it captures who is currently opening up our form so we can find information around them. So we put a current user control on the ShareViz pre-process view, which is the very first view that when you open up a form. We'll put this control on here to identify what the full name of the originator is, what their email address is, their login information, what the current date is. You can see at the bottom there's this auto refresh. The auto refresh, let me put my laser pointer up here. The auto refresh down at the bottom is if it's the first time the form opens, we want to log who's there and let it go and not refresh who the current user is. So what we'll do is we'll have two current user controls. The first one doesn't auto refresh. It says who the originator is. The next current user control will say auto refresh. And the reason we want to use that auto refresh is if there's specific sections in your form that based on who you are, we want to show it. I'll give you a good example is we have a performance management system. A management system has a performance evaluation. So we dropped one current user control on there, and whoever started the form, we logged that as the employee. Performance evaluations start with an employee. Once the employee was logged, we went to the next step, and it was a manager review. Now, with the manager review, they're rating the employee, but we also have what's called a ShareViz status view. So HR can come and look at the status of an employee's evaluation. So we put the current user control and said auto refresh. We checked it, and we said log who the current email address is into a viewing email. And then we took this email address and queried a SharePoint list and said, is this person in HR? If the person was in HR, we showed them everything that was in the form. If they weren't in HR, then we just showed them only the information that they were allowed to see. So based on who you are, you can use this current user control to auto refresh, or in the case of the originator, you want to find out their email address and things like that, you can just not check the auto refresh. Okay. Form completion delegation allows a designated person to delegate to complete a form on someone else's behalf. The person for whom the form has been completed will receive a notification that the form has completed and is awaiting their review and approval. So it allows you to assign somebody else to complete the form on your behalf. An example of this may be like an employee I-9 form. Based on, say, it's a U.S. form and I only speak English, I can choose to assign it to my HR person to complete it on my behalf. That would be an example of a form completion delegation. There may be other things such as filling out purchase order information or filling out material master data that you want to assign somebody else to complete it on your behalf, that they're maybe a coworker. I don't use this control a lot, but just know that it is available, and if you do come across those requirements that you have to allow a form to be completed on the behalf of somebody else, that's what the WS form completion delegation control does. The WS form name is the control that we use to give a form a unique name. So I'll show you an example of a form and what's called a name template. A name template is a predefined way of naming your form. So if the default settings, if we don't give our form a name, actual name, it's going to take the name of your process and then the date. So if our name of our Winshuttle workflow is capital expenditure request, when I submit my form, it's going to say capital expenditure request and today's date. However, if the requirement for my user says, I want the form to be named CER dash the user who submitted it, the username dash a unique number, we can use the name template to actually show you that. So let's go ahead and stop there for a second, and we'll go take a look at name templates. Go ahead and open up our Winshuttle Designer. And we'll go ahead and call this example here name template. We'll make sure we store this with the other class examples. So we'll call this name template. We'll choose the SharePoint site that we'd like to deploy it to, which is going to be our Pfizer training. We'll go ahead and copy this URL here to our development. We'll make this active and hit OK. File, save solution. We'll call this name templates and hit save. Alright, with this name templates, we're just going to put a simple start node and an end node here. And we're going to go ahead and just update our InfoPath form to just call it name templates. And for the first version, version 1, so V1, we're not going to use the controls that we've been talking about, the WS form name. We're not going to use that. We're just going to let it show you what out of the box happens. So we'll say save, and then we'll hit publish. Alright, our solution published. I'm going to go to our Pfizer site here, and we'll refresh our screen. And we can see our new form here called name templates. So if I launch this form, it just says name templates. We'll hit save and route. It's just going to go to start and to the end node. But what I want you to see is the actual form name here. So it's called name template and then today's date and time. Now our business requirements are saying that each form has to have its own unique name, and it has to have who's currently submitted in the form and what have a unique number after that. So let's go ahead and update our, let's just add a new name template. This is also new to 10.6. Before, you'd have to go to Tools, Name Templates, and you had to add name templates this way in ShareViz 6.0 days. Instead, in 10.6, you can now have name templates all part of your solution set. So we're going to go ahead and say new solution, or new name template. We'll edit our name template, and we're going to call this, we'll say add, and let's change the first one. We'll hit modify. And when you modify it, you get different options. So do you want it an alphanumeric or alphanumeric, or you can say constant. You can have it a month, a number, a quarter, a day, or a year. So if you just choose year, it'll put the current year there. If you choose day, it's going to put the day. In our case, we're just going to call ours name dash, and then we'll give it a unique number here. This right here is by number, assigning this number to this field. It's going to increment this number by 1 every time a form is submitted. So we'll hit OK on this, and then we'll give it a name, our name template a name. So we're going to, instead of being name template 1, we'll call it name template without a space. We'll save this, and then we'll go back to our form, and we're going to add a couple fields to our form. So the first thing we'll add here is a text box, and we'll just call this form name. The next thing we're going to add is a Winshuttle control called WS form name, which is here. When we add a form name, we can right click and say WS form name properties. Under our properties, we're going to have a little bit of information to fill out. So what is the template name? Well, the template we called was name template. What field do you want to put the information in? We're going to call it form name. And when do you want to assign this? Well, we want to assign it when someone submits it, so we're going to say run at end. And the other thing that we want to do here is maybe append a username at the end. So what I'll do is add one more field here. We'll call this current. Let's add another text box up top here. Call this requester. So we know our fields, and we'll call this form name. We'll call this field requester login. Hit OK. And we'll update our form name. Now, if you remember when I created the template, I put a dash sign, so it was a number dash a number, or it was name template dash a number. So I would expect to keep the same dashes. So when you want to use fields that are in your form, what we do is we say, go over here, right click, and say add. We're going to call this field hyphen. We're going to set the default value to be a space dash space. Hit OK. We can look at the properties here. Actually, better to do a function called string.concat. So we'll do text concat. We want to put a space. We want to put a hyphen. and we want to put another space. And I'll show you what this looks like and why we're using this. So I'll go, when you have your fields over here, you right click, there's a copy XPath. That's pretty important because this control over here, when we're using this control, we have to separate the name template by, if we're using values from our form, we have to separate it by using the XPath. So we put a comma here first. After we have a comma, then we put the name of our field, and then the last field I want to copy over is the requester login information. So I want to right click and say copy XPath. We'll go back to our form name. And we see a comma there, and we'll put the login information. So the only thing else we need on this particular control is the WS current user control. So we had already talked about the current user control. So we'll go ahead and find it in our selection. So WS current user. We'll right click on the current user control, and you'll see the same properties that we saw before. And we want to store the requester, the login name for who's filling out the form. We want to store it in a field called requester login, which is the same field we see here. When you move the Winshuttle controls out of the way, you can actually see in the background what the name. So if you're wondering, did I spell it right, or is this the right name? This is how you can see in the background what's actually there. All right, that's all done. We'll save this. We'll save this as well, and we'll publish. You get a new functionality in 10.6 to overwrite name templates. So if you have a name template that you started and you want to overwrite it and test, that's fine. But once you deploy this once to production, and we want that unique number to keep on incrementing, you don't want to overwrite your name template in production. So you got to be real careful of deciding whether you want to overwrite the name template that you set up here, or do you want it to stay there. So now we're going to flip back over to our site. We'll go ahead and launch our form here. And remember, this is what the name template used to say. It used to say name template and then a date. So we're going to see the requester who's logged in as the administrator. We don't have any form name information yet because we told our form name control to say run when it's at the end. So I'll hit save and route. And now look at our name template. So now it's name dash a unique number dash the username. If I ran the same thing over for again, that unique number that we set up there says increment every time the form is submitted. Now we should see number 2 here. The form names have to be unique. You cannot have 2 of the same form names. So using a unique number or a date or a time gives us that uniqueness that we need. If we open up the actual form that we submitted, we're going to see that the form name is filled in here. So we usually fill in the form name, and then we'll stick it in the header, maybe on the top right. We'll have our logo or our company on the left. We'll have the name of the form in the center, and then we'll have the name of the actual form name that was assigned from Winshuttle on the right side. So when you print this form out, you can actually see the form name. Some people have it called form name or form title. You can call it whatever you like, and you can also stick it wherever you like on your form because it is storing that value in a text box. Okay. See, there's a question, so let me open up our questions here. We'll pop this out. It says, where do we configure which new is used at stage, used at any stage? Where do we configure which view? Okay. So you're asking which view is used at which stage. So we configure which view is used at which stage in 2 separate spots. First, you have to define your multiple views here. So let's just go ahead and create view 2 and hit OK. Next, we have an approver node or a activity node or even a notification node, all of which have a form view here that allows you to select which view to show somebody. So based on if it's an approver view, we say it's read only, and then we want to assign the approver view. So we can go up to view 1 here and call it, or view 2, we can call it approver, like that. We can also click on view 1. Since we know view 1's the very first view, if you hit the drop down, instead of having to remember the name of the unique views that Winshuttle recognized, preprocessor meaning the first view that shows up, resubmit view is when you're resubmitting a form, the process status view is when it's currently running and in process and you don't have assigned a task, and post process is when the form's complete. So with this one, we'd want to say this is the preprocessor view. So on our approval node now, we can say, well, this is a manager. We'll call our approval node manager approval, and with an expense report or PO request, the manager is going to be approving it, but they're not allowed to change any values. So we click on our node here, and we go up to our form section right here, and then we say, this is the approver view. So hopefully that answers your question on where do you assign views. That's the similar functionality is on an activity node as well as a notification node. All right. So that's our example of the current user control and our example of the name templates. Go ahead and get back to our slide deck here. If you want to look at name templates, you can go to Tools, Name Templates. If you click on that, you can see any name template published to that site. So this is referring to the old ShareViz days, that when we added our name template to the solution, it still does deploy it, so you can actually check it out. You could modify here. You can see that there's a number that's incrementing. Say you want to change that number to not start at 2. Say you're implementing a new application and you want all numbers to start after like 100. You can put 100 in here, and then the next form that submits is going to be 100, and then the next form after that's 101. So this shows you what the last number. So if you put 100, the next form that would submit would be 101. In our example, we have 2, so the next form we submit would be 3. You can modify it here, but I would recommend not to, because you want to keep your name template in sync with your solution. So instead of modifying it in here would be better. All right. So that's name templates and the current user control, some of the other controls we covered. Form validation. The form validator control is an out-of-the-box way to validate controls on your screen. So if you have an email address, you're wanting an employee to type in their email address. Well, you want to make sure they add a valid email address. Some of the key characteristics of valid email addresses is that they have an @ or a @ sign. You can also validate that there's a .com or a .net or some type of dot at the end. So you can use what's called regular expressions to validate, and that's what you see over here on the right. These are regular expressions that tell us what we're validating. So let's this here is a regular expression. We'll validate an email address. We can see right here, right above the laser pointer, is an @ sign, which means it's looking to make sure whatever the user typed in, we don't care what they typed in before, but they have to at least have an @ symbol. These regular expressions can get very complicated, so the best way to figure out regular expressions is to just do an online search. It says valid email regular expression, and you'll be able to get one of these back, and then you can just copy it. And you can see what it does is it asks you for a regular expression, then it asks you which field to monitor, so maybe we call this field employee email, and then what error message do you want to give if this regular expression fails. So we use the regular expressions to validate fields at the top. We also have comparison, so we can compare field 6 to field 7. If field 6 is less than field 7, then we can give an error. So you can validate per field. And then at the very bottom is a plugin validator. What this thing allows you to do is it allows you to create your own custom code. When we talk about plugins on session 3, we'll talk about custom code. And what the custom code does is you can create your own custom code to look at the form and validate. Some of our top 5 things that we see us validating is the email address, a date format, a valid phone number, if a field contains data, so they can't submit it unless this field contains data, and our other things we say just search Google for regular expressions. Part of the class that we'll be sending out is our ShareViz form validators that actually has an example of what you just saw on the screen. So you can open up the solution and take a look at the InfoPath control. ShareViz form validators. If you scroll down through the solution, you're going to find the ShareViz form validator in the properties. Let's see here. Right here it is. So we'll right click on this, go to WS form validator properties. On the form validator properties, it has your regular expression here, and you says the error that's stating you entered an invalid email address. Please follow the format example at winshuttle.com. So you can see the regular expressions and all of that. We're going to be turning after today's class. I'll be sending this to the class. The examples we've done here today, but there's another section here. Let's go back to here. Under these examples, there's a Winshuttle controls. I'm going to be sending you every control that we're talking about right now. So there's a assignment control, attachment control, the buttons, the comments, everything that we've looked at, that we'll look at in this first hour is all going to be covered in the examples that I'll send out after class. Okay, so that's our form validation. The history control, I use this control exclusively on every single workflow, because every single workflow will require... Yep.
I had a question.
Sure.
For the custom validation, is it implemented in JavaScript or C#?
That one is particularly implemented in C# if you're doing a custom validator, but you can always use the JavaScript. It's like an either or. If you want to use the custom validator, you would use C#. If you want to use JavaScript to validate your form, you can use JavaScript. The only reason I would say you would use a custom validator versus JavaScript is if you're calling some back-end ERP system or some file share to check if a value is correct. So that's the only reason I would use maybe a custom validator versus JavaScript.
Okay, since another question that I had was, like normally in SharePoint we have this post-process view that we have to create, right? Like, would we have to create it, or what happens if we do not create that view? Does it take any default?
So say that again.
Normally in SharePoint, when we create a form, InfoPath form, we create a post-process view.
Yep.
Yeah, so does it, like, even now, is it required that we create those views, or does it take a default or something?
It will take the default. So if you don't have, on our example we have here, we have 2 views, but we don't have a post-process view. Whatever form is set as the default is what's going to show up on when a form is completed. So yes, it will take either or. If I define approver as the default, but I do have this pre-process view, the pre-process view always trumps what the default, because the pre-process view says this is the view that you need to show when you start up a form. But if I don't have a preprocessor view defined, then it takes whatever value is set as the default.
Okay.
And then looks like there's some other questions here. So custom validator implemented, that was from Joe Jin. JavaScript, you can do JavaScript, and I will show an example in one of the sessions on custom JavaScript. So we'll show some custom JavaScript. Can we use rules in the WS controls? The WS controls you cannot use rules on. That's one of the biggest things I've always wanted to do is say, well, disable this control if this condition, and use rules and formatting to show and hide things. We tried to solve a problem with the attachment control. We said if the PO or the capital expenditure request, if it's an original or supplemental, show the quote attachment. If it's a seed, then hide the attachment. And then we set the property for the WS attachment to say minimum of a 1. So we had it in a hidden section. We put the control in that hidden section. When we did that and we went to the view and we said, well, make it a seed so it didn't require attachment, it still told us that even though the control wasn't being shown on the screen, that attachment was still required. So unfortunately, you can't apply any rules or any other conditional formatting on the Winshuttle controls. Also, we have add post-process view. What I do? Take a default. So yeah, if you define a post-process view, it will use that. If you select the post-process, it will use that view. If you don't define a post-process, it uses whatever's the default. Okay. If you have any other questions, just type them in the chat window or into the question window. Very, very good questions. All right. Our Winshuttle history control. This history control is used exclusively. It shows in line who's approved it, what time they approved it. You have two different options with the history control. I'll show when I create an approval later. We'll drop a history control on there so you can see what it looks like. There's two types. You can do a graphical and show the workflow. I don't use this option at all. I just don't see any value of showing the graphic. You may have business requirements to say show the graphic of the workflow. I use the table option, and with that table option, you're able to see wherever you put the history control, you'll see who the originator was, who the manager was, what time they reviewed it, what time they completed it, and what their disposition was. So the disposition meaning they approved or rejected it. The lookup control we're going to use a lot today on our actual demos with connecting to data sources. So here's an example of a lookup control. It's using a data source called vEmployee, which is a view, and it's saying show a first name, last name, address information, and when they actually select one of these, then it would go and set the values for that. So this is just an example of the pop-up when you click on this control. The other thing we use this control for is you can load drop-down lists. So you can pop up a window that has more values, or you can use a drop-down. The pop-up we exclusively use the lookup control for because you can see more information to help the employee or the customer service rep, who's ever selecting a value for maybe a vendor, they can see more information about it. You may have multiple vendors in your system with different ship-to locations, and you want to show the ship-to locations here that the person filling out the customer complaint or credit memo, whatever they're filling out, you want to show more fields. We actually were contracted with Winshuttle to do performance testing on the Winshuttle workflow product. When we did our performance testing, we actually found that this lookup control here using a drop-down list, you're actually increasing the time that it takes to load the form. So we recommend, if you're going to use a drop-down, do not use the lookup control. Either use a query control or a data connection. And I'm going to show you how to do those in our data sources section, the second half. But this control is very useful when you want to show a lot of information. It pops up. It's a nice pop-up, and we'll show that later. The process control, it shows up in line. It's a very nice control. Some of the functionality is duplicated when you look at like the WS comment. So right here is a comments box. Again, what I told you is you cannot duplicate this functionality. Or you cannot change this functionality, the look and the feel of it. It's just a control called WS process control. It allows you to include comments, so who's ever filling out the form, let them fill in their comments right here. It shows you the history of who filled out the form and what their comments were. And then it shows some workflow information and task information as well, and attachments are all inside of this process control. So this is the 4 different check bars. You can turn off comments if you want to use the Winshuttle comment control versus having comments display here. You can turn off comments, you can turn off assignments, you can turn off workflow. If you want to display, instead of displaying the assignment information or workflow history at the bottom, you want to use a Winshuttle history control, you can do that. The best thing about the process control is it gives you the capability to reassign a task. No other control that Winshuttle has allows you to reassign a task in line. So if I assign it to Justin to work on a help desk ticket, and this ticket can't be worked on by him, he knows that it should go over to Jason. We can drop this control on here, say allow reassignment, and then you allow them to reassign it to another team member, another help desk technician. The Winshuttle query control is extremely powerful. It hooks into any OLE or ODBC or LDAP or SharePoint list. There's really infinite possibilities of what this thing can do. You have to make sure you get the right format, the right connection string, and understand the underlying data that you're actually going after. But if you can master and understand that, then you can use this control really to hook into any other ERP system, Oracle database, Excel file, whatever you need to. This control is extremely powerful that allows you to do that. Some of the other core functions, and we'll show you this in our examples today for our second half, is the run at start, run at end, and run when field changes. So if you want something to run at start, you can go ahead and have it run at start and go load up the employee information, or go load all of the drop-downs for states. You can have that run at start. You can have a field say run when changed. So if I select a new location, I would expect my query to go get all the new location information. So we can say run when field changes and write a query that says when the field changes, go ahead and update the list underlying form values. In this example, we see run when field changes, even though it's not selected, as an employee email. So this screenshot was taken on a form that is a time off request form. So we say run this when it starts, go get the employee's information. However, if allow them, I had a second query control on there that said allow who's ever filling out the form to say, well, I'm filling out the form for Jason, but my name's Justin, but it's actually Jason's time off request. So it allowed the person to select who they were filling out for the time off request. So we actually said, well, when this email address changes, then go ahead and run the query again. So you can run when field changes, or you can run at the start or at end. We'll show you some examples today. These results can be displayed in a repeating element by using this append to repeating group. So if your query, you're expecting more results to come back, then you're going to want to append those to a repeating group. We'll show that with Active Directory today. We're going to search our Active Directory for some users. We'll put it in a repeating element so that you can see this query puts information in the repeating element. Our SharePoint User Map. This allows you to retrieve user information about who opened the form. So, we have a question?
Yeah, I had a question regarding this query control. Do we have any documentation as to how to retrieve from a list, or any example?
Yep.
Of
Yeah, so we do. I have tons of examples. This was one of the controls that, one of the examples I'm going to be sending you guys. There's a Winshuttle query control here. Here's a nice document and a solution file that covers some of the connection strings. There's also, if you open up a browser, let's see my screen here. If you go to connectionstrings with an S.com, connectionstrings.com has a bunch of connection strings for LDAP to SQL to some MySQL to any of the other different databases. Now, some of them work, some of them don't. So it is a kind of a testing. You have to test it. But if I was to look at, for example, Excel, you can look down through Excel and see if it says OLEDB, like this one, or you can look for something that says ODBC, right here, Microsoft Excel ODBC. This requires a driver to be installed on the server called Microsoft Excel driver. That'll need that to be installed on the server. So what that means is that, when I connect to, for example, a 10-year-old ERP system called Sightline, the only way I can connect to it was through an ODBC driver. So we installed that driver on the server, and then I referenced the connection string here. Once I had the connection string, then I referenced individual tables and columns within that actual database. But connectionstrings.com is definitely the first thing I would look at for a connection string. And the next, I would look over this document here. There's a nice Word document that explains some of the stuff that we've used it for. I have today I have connection strings for a SharePoint list, for a SQL server, and for Active Directory that I'll be demoing for you today. That I'll save this file in our examples that I'll be sending to you as well. I explicitly use a SharePoint list almost 9 times out of 10, 90% of the time I use a SharePoint list. So that's what I'll show you today. And let me see here. Go over to our questions real quick. See if there's any more. Let's see. Post-process, what is the InfoPath data source for the query control? What is the InfoPath data source for the query control? So you can actually use a data connection. So I can say connect to this SharePoint list as a data connection inside of InfoPath, and then use that as the data source. Let's see here. Unless I'm going to show you one other thing. Well, I'll show you. We'll just go this way. Pull up Designer real quick on this screen. Okay. So one of the most helpful things I've found with Winshuttle, they just got this document within, I would say, the last year. So if I go to Help Process Designer Guide, I'm going to go to the 10.6 Winshuttle Designer Guide. There's a thing called a Winshuttle Designer Action Reference Guide. This Action Reference Guide here has every control, every custom control, and what the properties are for it. So if I click on WS Query, the question was, what's the InfoPath data source? Specifies InfoPath data source to query. This will be the name of what you called your data source in InfoPath. So by looking at that, we can find all of the information about the connection strings and our user profile. What does the user profile do? And then down below, they usually have some examples. Like this is a connection string. This connection string connects to a SharePoint list. So you pass in the URL. And then the parameters over here, we have list equals. So I'm actually going to be doing this example. But these are some examples here that you can look at, some syntax and examples for these certain connection strings and the controls. So they just got this document, so they have definitely spent some time updating their document. We've been talking about the current user control and what auto refresh forces an update of a specified file regardless of the field contents. So I'll go ahead and close this, jump back over here. Alright, so let me write down something here. Examples. Okay. Close our designer down, and we'll jump back over to our control here. Okay. Very good question. All right, our next control is our SharePoint User Map. This control just retrieves user information about who opened the form, and it stores it in the actual value you specify for the email, the login information. The source XPath here is expecting that you put in a field that actually has the full name, and then it goes and grabs that information from SharePoint. So you can use the source XPath takes the information, so from the current user control you store the full name, then it takes that and stores it into these other fields. I don't use the SharePoint User Map that often because I simply just let them choose who. I use the current user control, and if somebody's adding additional people, usually I know their email address and full name, so I've never had to go get this. Very rarely have I used it, but for example, if somebody was typing in, I want my boss to approve it, and we say, well, type in your boss's email address. Well, once they type in the email address as the source, then we can go get his full name and his login information that we can use in our workflow. I don't use this control that often, but it is available. And last is our, not last, our SharePoint Users control allows you to retrieve members of a SharePoint group. So if we add a bunch of approvers to a SharePoint group and we want to retrieve information from that group and stick it into a repeating table, we would use the current user control for that. So here's an example is I have a SharePoint group, and in that group I have all of these different people. This will put it into a repeating table for you so that you can actually go see the you can go see who was in that group. We've used this, for example, if I wanted to show for a capital appropriation request, we have a SharePoint group called the Board of Directors. And if I want to show the user who's submitting a capital appropriation request, we can put a value in our form that says, if the capital appropriation request is over $1 million, then show this section. And the section we show is the repeating table that says these are the approvers that are going to be approving your capital expenditure request. So that's the SharePoint Users. It simply goes off of a SharePoint group and then pens to a repeating table. The WS URL control allows you to place a URL in the body of the form in the position that you specify. So if you want to put a URL in your form, you're going to use this URL control. You specify a lot of values like the description, the link, and if you want the window to be opened in the actual form or if you want to pop up a window. It allows you to stay inside your form if you want to. This control is really helpful when you're adding documentation links to your actual form. So if you created documentation on how to fill out the form or what the actual process is, You can store those inside of SharePoint, and then you use this control to put those links right in your form. I believe this is our last control is our workflow participant control. The workflow participant control, we talk about participant resolvers on session 3. This control is extremely useful when you want to bring inside your form on how you're going to assign people to a swim lane. So a swim lane can be assigned to a SharePoint group, which makes it extremely easy. But if you want to bring into your form and allow someone to select who they want to approve it, or you're going to search for an employee's manager, I'm going to search our Active Directory and say, who is Justin's manager inside of Active Directory? Or I'm going to search an employees list and says, who is Justin's manager? And take Justin's manager, his email address, store it, or his login information, store it in a field called Field 3, and then we have a swim lane called Manager. We're going to replace that swim lane for the workflow that we call capital expenditure request, PO request, or expense report. So it doesn't matter what the name of your workflow is, but we're using this section here called workflow definition that says use the workflow participant control, go to the definition called PO request, and then once you have that PO request, replace who's currently in the swim lane for manager approval, or in this case approver 1, replace it with whatever's in this field here. So you have swim lane behaviors as do nothing, add, or replace. And then when they're already assigned, you can either do nothing, let them participate, or reassign or add to a team. So those are ways to use the participant control to assign people to swim lanes. And we'll show an example of that today when we're doing our data sources. The InfoPath views, I'm going to gloss over this really quick because we kind of already talked about it, but the basic views is you can create a view and call it whatever you want. You can call it a requester view, approver view, or create all these views. You can allow a requester to add, edit, or delete, but an approver view, you want it read only. So a view is simply just a view of the data that's inside of your form. You can sometimes show or hide data based on the views. Some of the views that we add for 10.6 are all through the Solution Explorer. What I want to do to reiterate this is just show it to you. You do not want to open up InfoPath. So right now we have approver and pre-process view. If I launch InfoPath, inside of InfoPath, you have a page designer, and you got an option right here to say new view. You do not want to use this new view. This will break your form. You don't want to add views inside of InfoPath. If you're to add new views, you'll always have to add them on the Solution Explorer here. So once you say new view here, and we add a view 3, and we launch InfoPath again, view 3 is going to show up inside of our form here. But you don't want to create a new view. We created new views when we were doing ShareViz in 6.0. We created them right from InfoPath. But in the 10.6, we have to create new views from the Solution Explorer. So I'll go ahead and save this. Save. Go ahead and delete our view here. Delete this. Okay. And like we said before, these are your special views. The ShareViz pre-process view is presented at the form when you launch the form for the first time. The post-process view is when the process is complete. So if we look at our browser here, and I can see a check mark here, or an X, that means the process is approved. This means the process was rejected with an X. but these processes are officially complete. So when I click on this button, this link here, the view that's going to show me is the post-process view here. It's presented at the process when it's completed. The resubmit view is if I was to hover over any one of my forms and choose the resubmit option for a rejected form. That only happens for rejected. If I choose the resubmit, then it's going to show me the view called resubmit. Lastly is the ShareViz process view or process status view. It's presented when you don't have a task assigned to you. So right now this view, I have a task assigned to me for approver 3. But when I don't have a task assigned to me and I open up the form from up here, because this is the in process icon that we see, when I click on this and I don't have a task assigned to me, it's going to show me the status view. I showed you earlier how you can create a view, right-click on a view, select it from a drop-down, and then you can see the process status view here, or the resubmit view, or the pre-process. So you don't have to remember the actual name of it. You can just select it from a drop-down. All right. That completes our Winshuttle controls section. Let's save this. Do we have any questions on the Winshuttle controls? Jojen says, will I be able to use more than one preprocessor view? The answer is no. You can only have one preprocessor view per form. And it's the same question with the post-process, the status. You can only have one of those per form. Carrie says, participant control. Will you be able to show how to automatically assign a task to a user, the initiator's manager? Absolutely. We're going to be doing that next. What is InfoPath data source for the query control? And we already answered that question.